Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks again for joining us on our Friends Friday cast here at PlexTrac. We're super excited to have you. Thanks for taking a little bit of time out of your day. Hope you're enjoying getting ready for the weekend. We're joined by a very special guest, a good friend and colleague, partner, colleague, Ben Finke from OnDefend and Blind Spot. Super excited to have you on the show. Ben, before we kind of dive into our topic today, why don't you just kind of give a brief introduction to yourself for those that don't know you and, kind of what you're working on and stuff like that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for the invite. Really excited. So my name is Ben. I am the co-founder and CTO at a company called OnDefend. We do a lot of security consulting. We build some tools like a tool called Blind Spot that we use that helps us with our customers. And we were an early customer of PlexTrac, so excited to see what you guys have done over there. I think I came into the business like a lot of people did. Like I just sort of always enjoyed working with computers and then got a chance to do security work for real. And I didn't even know it was a real job, and still kind of amazed that people pay us to do this. But the need is real, and it's not going away anytime soon, man. It feels like we're making more work for ourselves, not less these days.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the old joke was like, oh yeah, someday we'll work ourselves out of a job, but that's not going to be.
Yeah. Maybe someday, but not anytime soon.
Not anytime soon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, super excited to have you. And obviously we've enjoyed, just being partners in crime, the last, for many years now, which has been fun. So, yeah. So for today's topic, we were really excited about kind of just being able to share, call them war stories or, startup stories or whatnot. But we've both been on the side of the fence of either founding or co-founding a security company, right? In a security startup. And just a startup in general. And so we thought it'd be kind of fun to just kind of, swap some stories, share, kind of what some of our experiences have been, for just, either for some fodder for people drinking coffee on a Friday or just, anybody that might be interested in like, hey, I might want to dip my toe in the water of like starting a company. So that's kind of like the stage for the topic that we're going to be chatting about today, which I think obviously is near and dear to both of our hearts. So Ben, maybe kind of share a little bit about your founding story, and kind of like how you got started, and what prompted the idea to go ahead and like dive in. How did you come to that decision? What was going through the thought process of like, because I think a lot of people that might have a bent towards entrepreneurship, and diving into founding a company, there's a lot of aspects to that decision, right? So I think, I always love to like just know what was yours. How did you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a long time, I was part of a managed service provider on the security team, ran the day-to-day security operations for a lot of customers, worked my way up and was, pretty high up in that program there. Really enjoyed it, but really found that there were some things I wanted to do that, just kind of bump your head up against like other things when it's not your company, right? And so I really enjoyed that experience, but sort of had a feeling that I would like to create my own at some point. I had no idea what format that would take. I thought for sure that pen testing and doing consulting work would be a major part of it. But I also knew that there was a lot of, we built a lot of our own tools and did a lot of stuff like that. Not stuff that our customers used, but stuff that our team did. And I saw how effective that was. And so when I was at that organization, I had read some stuff about like different startup incubators like Y Combinator and like all these things about, how you go create value in the world. And I was actually remembering one of your wheelhouse newsletters. You talked about some of the Simon Sinek books, right? Start with why. And so it's like, that was a lot of it for me. And I remember vividly reading a passage. It might be a Paul Graham Y Combinator thing, which that's its own thing. I'm not saying that they're 100% on all of this, but I remember they talked about if you're going to start your own business, you really need to have if you're going to start it, you need to have like either your co-founders or your first team. They have to be like really incredible, like people you would describe as animals or whatever they do. And so I was like, all right. So I was on the lookout for people who I would describe that way. So after I left that place, I was doing some freelance consulting and really trying to kicking around. And I got introduced by a mutual friend to my co-founder, Chris Friedman. And for those of you who don't know Chris is an absolute force of nature. And in a lot of ways, the exact opposite of me, like the perfect yin to my yang. And so I was like, oh, I think this could work. So we started it, and then after not too much longer, we brought our other partner now, Billy Steegs, onto the. Anyway, so the three of us started it. But it's one of those things. Like, it sounds so great because you're your own boss and you get to do this stuff. And what it really means is that there's nobody else there to do the work. Like, if you're not going to do it, that's just it, right? Nobody's going to do it. And I think that was really, so that part of it for me was like taking that leap and like starting, and just, when we started, we didn't do anything that was crazy overhead wise. I mean, I think it was literally, we just sold consulting services, and we just did it with our local, like our personal networks. So there was no marketing budget. There was none of that. It was just literally reaching out to people like, hey, we're doing this now. So I mean, that was definitely our start. Yeah. How about you? I mean, so you set out after doing a lot of different consulting work and a lot of pen testing work, and you're like, I see this missing part. Or is that how it started, or did it start some other way for you?
Yeah. No, I think so. Like, for one, I got the entrepreneurial bug kind of planted in me, I would say, at a young age. I was in high school. My dad, he was a college professor. He had owned his own consulting practice in just software engineering back in the late 70s and early 80s. So he always kind of had some of that entrepreneurial spirit as well, that kind of probably always got into me. I was a baseball player growing up. We didn't have a ton of money, and so we actually started a company where we built batting cages. We sold batting cages online. This was in the late 90s. Like, this was before like e-commerce, right? We were kind of like, I joked,
people,
we were
pioneering their credit card number and stuff, right? So you could take the order probably.
But we set up a website to sell batting cages online. So like, people would order through our website, and we'd ship them the batting cages. So that really kind of like, sparked a little bit of like enthusiasm into me around like, one, owning my own business, but just like having that kind of more sense of ownership around like my job. But then I was always obviously very fascinated in math and computer science. I got a degree in computer science. I went to graduate school and got a master's in computer security. So I started my career, and I just was really passionate about security. But I always kind of had this thing in the back of my head, like, man, I really would like to own my own business, or at least start a company in some fashion. So I kind of got to this point where it's like, that was kind of what was eating at me more, is like, I want to do something. And I hadn't really like kind of spent time to kind of really sit down and figure out what that might be. So I kind of was just putting some pen to paper of like, these are some pain points that I've had in my career thus far. Right. And, I think I kind of came to a realization, it's probably not going to ever have like this like world-changing idea, where it's like, it's just going to pop a light bulb, and then that's it, and I'll just know, and I'll just go, right? But I was like, but I want to start getting some experience in something to like be on the path to like, being starting a business and kind of going that route. So I was like, well, this is a pain I have. Like, I hate report writing. I hate the lack of collaboration in our reporting, and I hate coming back a year later and rewriting the same report, specifically related to. So I'm like, well, I'll start. I mean, I can solve this problem. I'm a hacker and a coder. I have 2 degrees in computer science, so I can solve that problem. So I set out to just solve that problem, knowing, hey, if anything, I'll be the first user of it, and maybe the only user of it. But at least I solved a problem for me. And that's kind of how I got started. Is like, I started with the project more of a nights and weekends kind of bootstrapping it type thing. And then it just kind of continued to evolve. So I always started it with the intent that it could be a business, but if not, then I, would learn something along the way and maybe find something else, right? And so that was how I got initially started. Taking the leap to actually dive in full time was a little bit more of a mental calculus, right? I was we finally I had several customers, and it was kind of definitely starting to feel like, okay, it really is time to like either devote full time to this thing, or not, so kind of a fish or cut bait, even though I didn't have I wouldn't say I had enough money coming in from just the software sales to really, make ends meet, so to speak. But, we'd kind of been preparing a little bit on the financial side. I always like my risk management calculus is maybe different than others in that like I still trust myself that like if this doesn't work out, I can always go find another job.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, no, that's important.
so it's like, hey, why, like, we're at a good spot, let's just do it. And so dove in. Yeah, and it was just me. I didn't have a co-founder, so like I didn't have many people to commiserate with except my dog sitting at my feet.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But we're very fortunate then to get introduced to some great people, got some initial investment, then hired some amazing people that were part of our early days, and so, that's kind of how we got rolling. So I think what's interesting is like we both have like similar kind of like thought processes around how we kind of approached starting a business. I kind of dove in straight into the product side. You started in the consulting and services side. And I think in security, I don't know if there's like another category that security companies get started in under, right? They either, I'd be curious what your thoughts are. Like, I mean,
I think you're right. I think it's service or product, right? I mean, it's one of those two. And the path we took, starting with doing like security testing consulting specifically, is great because there's basically no overhead. Like just somebody with a laptop is going to suddenly start doing these things, and you have, when you sell the first gig, like the first pen test that you get, it's like, okay, you do it, and it's like you take out your time, and you're like, oh, this is actually pretty profitable, right? So you go. We were really fortunate in that we had like I said, a pretty good network. We could source some people who trusted us because we were literally, 2 and then 3 people, right? With like no background. I did not understand how difficult it would be to get through most like large organizations, procurement groups with that setup, right? I mean, we had nothing. We just incorporated our domain. I think was new enough when we sent emails that sometimes it got quarantined to spam because it was still like, less than 60 days old.
It looks like
so, stuff like, yeah, exactly. Right. We just stood it up, right? Like, who are these people? And so from that perspective, the services is a great entry point. On the other hand, it also is super crowded because the barrier to entry is pretty low, right? So if you know people and you can go sell that stuff, then I think that may be a good path to go. But to your point, I mean, if you're going to get that customer to come back again, you have to demonstrate some level of proficiency and some valuable output that at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, that was worth having these knuckleheads do it for me versus other people that have been doing this for years, right? And so I don't know what the actual statistic is now, Dan, maybe you do, but there's something like, some crazy percent of businesses fail in the first 3 years.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so you really just got to figure that plan out. And I think it's that, right? I think you get in, you've got an idea, you sell a couple things, and then it's just like, like getting that pipeline built and getting like recurring work is tough.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part of like getting your name out there, showing you have value, right? And whatever it is, whether it's a service or a product, right? But you're right. I think the barrier to entry on the services side is lower, but it's in terms of cost, right? Like because it is it's your brain power, it's your background and experience that you're actually bringing to the table. You didn't have to go build something first to then go sell it, which is kind of what I had to do.
Yeah. Well, and the product side, on the services side, a lot of customers will have pen test already in the budget or some type of security consulting. So you don't have to wait for a budget cycle. I can only imagine what it was like for you guys to get, because you're not in a category that people necessarily have to have. And you probably had to wait like for really long budget cycles to spin around, right?
For sure. So especially, so I think, we sell to service providers, consulting firms like yourselves, and then, and then enterprise teams where, your like OnDefend's procurement cycle was much quicker to get through than a larger customer, right? That's like an enterprise. They have like 4 levels of vendor security questionnaires and legal reviews and procurement, a whole so those were things you kind of had to learn along the way of like, okay, especially when cash is king, you've got to really like make sure, okay, hey, this deal's going to happen, but we're probably in a 60 to 90 day sales cycle just from the procurement life cycle, just from the time like we've already done all the selling, the business wants now they have to go and get it, and so it means like we're probably not getting cash in the bank for 4 to 5 months, right? And so you've got to calculate, okay, like, what does that impact for our bottom line, right? And that's also that's also, part of the reason why, like people do go for funding. And that's part of the reason why we chose to go for funding too, is that it helps ease that life cycle, and it gives you the investment to grow. And I know that was kind of one of the things that we were going to chat about too, was just like, the different funding paths that people have. Like I get asked all the time, like, oh, should I raise money? Should I not raise money? And I think my advice is always, it really depends on the business, like what is the business, what's best for the business. Because like you guys have built a solid consulting firm, and now you're also building a product, right? So, and I think a lot of companies do that. I'd love to hear your perspective on how that is going, or has, continues to go. And, because, I think there's a lot of people that have tried to build a product out of their services, as well as like build services around their product, right? So I'm curious to your perspective on that path.
Yeah. So anecdotally, I think a lot of consulting firms believe they can build products, and I think probably most of them are wrong. It's one of those things, like, it's not easy. I'm not even necessarily sure we do it totally the right way. So we are 100% bootstrapped. We don't have any investors or anything else like that. One thing that has let us do, and I think this is probably the phase you guys were in before a lot of your your Series A and stuff kicked in, right? Was you have the complete control of what the platform does. So you're still a bit like tinkering with it, playing around with it. And what's beneficial is, like, it's just you making the decisions. I think in our opinion, and I don't know that we'll stay bootstrapped forever, I think as we find these these valuable things that we're getting signal from folks in the marketplaces, like, that's a thing I really want. I want, like, to use that a lot. Then that is kind of like helps us hone in on it. It's like, what does this exactly have to do? For folks who don't know, we built a product called Blind Spot that we sort of tripped and fell into building. Like, we didn't set out to do it. When we started OnDefend, one of my goals, as I mentioned from my previous places, we would build a lot of tools. We have our own development team in-house. They don't do work for other customers. They just do work for us. And most of what they do is like connect stuff together. Well, so we started doing a lot of, didn't have a great name at the time, but purple teaming, I think is pretty widely known as to cover a lot of this, like, threat informed specific testing, where you're looking at, like, improving the tuning of the tools and everything. We just had different aspects of it that were friction points for our team. Like, it just takes too long to run the activity, takes too long to score, it takes too long to do that. So we just started building these little, like, point solution tools that we then, like, went back and rewrote it as to, like, a contiguous app. And then we realized that would probably be valuable for other folks too. But we still deliver it. It still kind of powers a lot of, like, we still deliver that as a service. So customers get access to it, but it's not just a standalone product, although people get that too. But so anyways, in doing that, a lot of that was like, I don't know, is this cool? Is this good information? Is this helpful? And so it was really great. Like, we got really good feedback from customers who need to do these things. And so I think the problem that we see most companies who take money and then fail, it's because they didn't really know what their product was going to do yet. And then they talk about these grand pivots later, and, like, changes and course correction, and even pivoting is fine. But the idea is, like, they hadn't figured out the thing yet that was, like, valuable. That was why somebody would start paying you money and keep paying you money.
Yeah.
Right. And so, because you don't want to be figuring that out when you're burning through your investment money. You want to be using that as, like, the rocket fuel that you're going with. And so that's kind of how we see it. Like, when we feel like we've got that thing on the launch pad and it's, like, finally, like, standing straight up and ready to go to the moon, then that's when we'll ignite that rocket. So we certainly talk to folks about it. And you guys did a lot of due diligence, I think, before you took any of that money. So you knew you had, like, a good group of investors that you trusted that would give you good advice and bring that up. So when you thought about doing that, was that a timeline in your head, or was there, like, a moment when you sat down and you looked at, like, the overall trajectory? Was there some metric that you were trying to hit that you're like, okay, now it's go time?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, because we're now, so basically we're a Series B funded company, right?
Right.
So we went seed, Series A, and Series B, for those that may not be aware of how funding cycles work and everything, right? But so like, kind of coming back to this, like, sometimes of, like, how I'll just say, like, hey, I think taking funding really depends on the business, right? It shouldn't just be like, oh, we're going to go take funding to start a company. It should really be based on, like, what kind of business are you in? What kind of market are you in? It's not a one size fits all. And, like, I think that's that's probably something that maybe people don't really think about, at least maybe, I don't know. But so like what I felt was important about PlexTrac is that when I did dive in full time, I was like, at some point I know we'll probably need to take funding, because it's the type of product that really does need to grow quickly and get kind of first mover advantage, into the market. As opposed to something that could stay in stealth for a long time or anything like that, right? We weren't that kind of a company. So like I did personally feel like what was best for the business would be to take funding to help accelerate growth as quickly as possible, right? And accelerate, the development, right? Because it was just me, and I didn't have additional revenue coming from other consulting services. Like I did some side work, just to kind of help pay bills. But then, like what I was always struggling with is like, anytime I'm spending $1 or an hour on a consulting gig is an hour spent less on writing code.
That's right. Right.
So, so when I dove in full time, and I was just going to do, kind of like split my time between consulting and development, software development, thinking, okay, at some point, we're going to raise money. But I distinctly did not have a like, hey, I'm going to go, we weren't in a mode of like, hey, I have to raise money now. Right. So I didn't have a plan as to when I'd raise money, but I did get introduced to a lot of folks. And that's kind of what started to facilitate the conversation around, okay, like maybe now is the time to take capital and just like, pour fuel on the fire. So that was really the calculus for the seed round. Right. And then with the seed round, it allowed us to start hiring some folks, develop more development help resources, keep accelerating the roadmap and all the things that wanted to get into it, and getting more customers. And then, we grew through 2020. So our metrics were, we reached some certain milestones that really then started to unlock conversations around the Series A. And so that was kind of like, that was kind of how that all kind of came together. But I think, like, again, if it's like, if your product or your business is like more tenable for a bootstrapped or organic model, like, I mean, some of the time it's like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, there's not one size fits all for how you grow a business. Right. And so,
for sure.
That tends to be kind of like the conversation I have with folks that are really contemplating taking money or building. But I 100% agree with you in that there's a lot of people that will take money before they really have any notion of how they're going to commercialize something, or if there's actually a market for what they're selling. And we were
that's true.
We were fortunate we'd already commercialized, right? We had people purchasing our product, right? So.
I mean, that's the best signal, is when people are going to actually give you money for the thing that you are building because they found some value in it, right? I mean, there's so many cool ideas out there, but it's hard to tell. Like, there's a lot of tools that like a customer might find valuable, but they may have a very specific circumstance that allows them to take whatever your thing does, your product does, and then get it the rest of the way to done, right? And so that's what we're discovering is like, there's a certain market for just straight, some of the work that we do, but without making some changes to it and like being able to kind of like give it a finished product, right? Like a finished outcome, I guess. It can be a tricky sell. And so like everybody agrees it's cool. Like when we go demo, everyone's like, oh, that's awesome. But then when it comes time for like, and that's kind of the things that we've been navigating. I think we've made a lot of progress there. And so that's what I think. But for PlexTrac, what I loved about it when we saw it was like, it was obvious to us that this was going to save teams time, right? For how much we've spent doing work, and it was going to ramp up the quality, because now we didn't have to worry about like every time somebody did a finding for a well-known vulnerability, we didn't have to go through and make sure they were using like the correct up-to-date finding. Like there was just so many pluses we saw of like saving time and money, right? And so that was like an easy win for when we evaluated PlexTrac.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, one, appreciate that. but but I think that when you talk to like people that are looking at starting a company or founding a company, really making sure that they've thought through all of those like objections, like what are the objections, right? And I think the I was a big fan of, and still am. I just haven't listened to it as much. But Y Combinator, Paul Graham, Sam Altman, those guys, they put out some just great resources, right?
Yes.
You mentioned something about pivoting, right? And I think Sam Altman was the one who's like, we work with companies that's like, they talk about pivoting, but it's like, it's somewhere they actually were always wanting to go anyways with, so it like,
right.
A true hard pivot, like, of a company is usually like a death sentence, right? Like, it's,
yes.
It's more like, hey, you always wanted to be in this direction. It's just, you're kind of steering there sooner than you probably thought you were going to need to be. But if you have to be like, nope, this is completely different from what we were thinking we were going to do, that means you really didn't have product market fit. That probably means you were going to, you're going to be in a world of hurt, right? And be one of those statistics.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so I don't mean to say that like you can't ever change your direction, because of course, like nobody knows what the future is going to be like. You're going to run into some really great idea, to your point, that supports the mission of what you're trying to do anyways, and like maybe that becomes the place that you really pivot to, right?
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that I really like that they talk about, we actually went through a startup school with Y Combinator, one of the remote versions, and we ended up bringing a product before we built Blindspot. We had another thing that we thought was going to be valuable, turned out to not be, and so thank goodness we did that. But the experience was great. One of the things that we think a lot about, and you probably do too, is who is the buyer,
right,
for the thing we're buying, we're trying to sell, right? Because a lot of times it's like it seems obvious until you go through the exercise of like, who is actually like at the customer, like who is our like our ideal customer? Why do they need the thing? And who is going to be the one making the decision? And then you have to go back to, does that person have any money?
Right.
Because if the person who's going to really like your product doesn't have any money, now they have to go convince other people with the money that your thing is cool, right? And that's going to be harder.
Yeah. And also, is there more than like, a handful, if not just one buyer, right? Like, how big is this market? It's like
right.
That's something we have to think a lot about too, right? Because pen testing itself is a smaller market, right? In terms of and so like, hey, is this something that can be valuable and scalable? And I think those are important things to discern too when you're talking about going and raising capital versus bootstrapping it, right? Is like you do have a lot more autonomy to spend time really fleshing that out when you haven't taken money, right? Like like in some respects, time is on your side a little bit more, but I think we all agree like time is money, right? Like you got to go fast, period, right? Like you said, you got to be an animal, right? Especially in those early days where, it's just you. So, so let's see. So I know we're already, kind of getting close to time here, but one quick question for you, like, I have not experienced, having a co-founder, right? So I was a solo founder, and I think if I were to go back and do this again, I probably would spend some time. I'd probably spend some time actually kind of identifying that co-founder. Like, I was very autonomous, and like, because I had some exposure to like business as well as the tech side, I just naturally just did it all myself. But I think I would probably, if there's, people ask, hey, what would you do? You learn a lot along the way. There's things you never would have known. So you can't just play like, oh, I totally would have done this 100% differently. But I think there's one thing I'd probably look for that co-founder, for me, probably, I don't have a co-founder ever, but like probably would have like gone the co-founder route. But I'm curious, like, how has that experience been for like, finding co-founders, and then kind of, doing it together? Would you do anything different, I guess?
No. So I would definitely not have tried. I would definitely not go back and think I could do OnDefend by myself. There is zero doubt about that. The thing here was a team effort, and it took the team that we had in place the whole time. There's no doubt about that. One of the great things about having a co-founder is that, especially in the relationship that Chris and I have, where Chris doesn't do, like when we first got together and we hung out the shingle and we were doing pen testing, like that was not what Chris did. But what Chris did, what was great, was he would write up all like the proposals. He would go out and like, beat the streets looking for work. He would go, do all these things. So while I was heads down, like doing the pen test, he was out selling the next one, which is great because a lot of folks who do like initial like solo consulting, that's the problem. You just mentioned it about like the side gig for taking away from product time. Well, if you yourself are the product and you're you get a gig and you're like, great, I get to do this work. As soon as you're like done with that project, you better have another one lined up, or you're gonna have to charge a lot for those projects to make it, right? And so that was really good. And also it was really helpful because a lot of times I would come up with something that made sense to me that I'm like, oh, that's a super valuable outcome. And then I would have to explain it to Chris and be like, why would I care about this? Right. And Chris comes at it much more from like the way that non-CISOs come at it, which is really helpful to have that person in your camp, if you can, like, explain this to me outside of security, like why I would spend all this money on that. And that can be, then you realize like, oh yeah, no, I guess I got to rethink that. Right. And so that's been really helpful to put that thing down. Now, that's not to say that Chris and I don't occasionally butt heads any type of creative process like this where you're kind of under the stress, but it's been really great. I can only imagine like as a solo founder, because there are some days like you have like a call with a customer or something like that, and you both kind of have to like take a breath for a second, like go step outside and like, okay, what are we gonna do about this, right? And it's very helpful to have people to talk to about those things.
Yeah, for sure.
And frankly, that was what took me as long as it did to start OnDefend. I knew I wasn't going to do it by myself. I wanted to find somebody that I thought could do, could help, put that together. And so it was after I met Chris that I realized that like I think this could actually happen now. Which was, I remember vividly that very exciting day. Like I was like up running on the treadmill at the gym that morning. I was like elated. Like this can actually happen now. It was really, it was really amazing. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. And I mean, I've been fortunate. I mean, I won't say like, while I didn't have a co-founder, I've been super fortunate to have some really solid people that joined early on. You could bounce a lot of, you could share a lot of that load, but there is a difference. I think, I definitely know there's a difference. There's certain things. It's like, hey, at the end of the day, they're not like, they're not a founder. Right. And so like they're going to have a little bit different mentality. So, I had to bear some of that myself, but so like, I think that, a lot of people ask me that question and stuff. And so, could I do it again by myself? Probably, because I did it once, but like, I would definitely recommend, like my recommendation.
It's so much work.
It's try to find somebody else that can go with, we knew we'd shoot the breeze for a lot longer than we thought we would. And this is
this needs to be like a 4-day workshop. Like
exactly.
You know what I mean? We could fill days with stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, maybe we'll do a part 2 or something in a bit, or do a webinar or something. But yeah, Ben, thanks so much for taking some time. Tell us, like, anything that what can we promote about you? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so we're really active on especially LinkedIn, but I mean all the socials. But if you follow us on LinkedIn, we've got some new series going on, some sort of like behind the scenes with some CISO customers of ours, some real challenges they face and some things that go. And so it's not all just like marketing about us. I mean, there's a fair amount of that, but a lot of like challenges that folks are solving in kind of like new and exciting ways. And we have some cool things coming out both for Blind Spot and just OnDefend in general. So if you follow us there, you can sign up for our little newsletter. We don't send it that often. It's always full of good stuff when we do. And so I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I will tell anybody that will listen, like, work with these guys. There's top-notch quality work and just great people. I always enjoy, the people that we get to meet along the way in our journey. And you guys are at the top of the list in terms of people that I just really enjoyed just meeting and getting to know and becoming friends with. And so, thanks for joining Friends Friday. And you know how to get in touch with Ben and OnDefend and the team there. As always, you know how to get in touch with PlexTrac. If you have any questions or any thoughts, leave them in the comments and we'll get back to you and chat. And but again, thanks for joining. Happy Friday and enjoy the rest of your weekend.